Morning, community at the Redstone Arsenal, and those that'll hear this. I'm Chaplain Goza. I am the Deputy Garrison Chaplain here at the Bicentennial Chapel. And this morning, I would like to just have a few words to hopefully give a sense of calm and peace during the midst of the storm. And as I think through what's going on the outside, I'm reminded of a story out of Matthew chapter 14. And at the beginning of the chapter, or after about the first 7 verses or so, Jesus is out and walking around. He's healing people. He's giving the sight to the blind. The lame are beginning to walk. He's preaching to the multitudes. And around verse 8 or so of Matthew chapter 14, Jesus is approached by his disciples, and they say, these folks are getting tired, they're getting hungry. We need to let them go home and get some supper and some rest. And so Jesus comes back and says, well, why don't you feed the people? And so they were like, well, we don't have anything here but some fish and bread. And Jesus says, well, let me see it. And he blesses it and feeds, the scripture says, 5,000 men, which goes on to say, besides women and children. Some theologians will say it could be upwards of 15 to 25,000 people that Jesus was able to feed with a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. And so I think if I would have been a witness to that miracle, I would have been pretty much on a spiritual high. I would have been in awe and wonder and amazement as to the power that Jesus had to be able to feed that many people. But after the folks were all fed and nighttime was coming, Jesus told his disciples, I am going to go out onto the mountaintop and pray, and I want you disciples to go and get on the boat and go to the other side of the sea, and I'll meet you over there. As the disciples are out into the middle of the water, a storm comes up, and they are becoming pretty fearful. And I want to read just a portion of Matthew chapter 14, and starting in verse 22. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from the land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked out on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. The disciples worshiped him and saying, "You really are the Son of God." And so my point on this passage is we've been on this economic high over the last 3 years. People are back to work. Economy's doing good. Unemployment's down. The markets were up almost to the highest ever, almost at 30,000 points. So people were excited about what was going on and having to be able to care for their families and all that goes along with a good economy. And then all of a sudden now we have this virus that comes on, and people are in panic. People are overbuying for things that they need in their home. And so there's a lot of fear that is going around, and people are taking their focus off what was and what is, and they've taken their focus off God Himself. And fear and panic is starting to come about. And so when I see this story of Peter, how he gets out of the boat, how he walks on the water, but then he begins to look at the storm itself, and he begins to doubt, and he sinks in the water. He took his eyes off the prize per se, and he looked at what was going on around him, and fear set in and he began to sink. So I encourage you today, don't look at what's going on around. If we focus on the chaos that is going on around us, we lose focus of what is the truth. And the truth is that God really cares. He's there with us. He's in the midst of the storm. He's grabbing our hands and pulling us up out of the storm. And so don't be like Peter, but be like Peter in a way where he was able to step out of the boat in faith and walk on water. The only person I have ever read in any book of any time, fully human and a sinner at that, Peter walked on water because he had faith. But when he looked at the storm, he began to sink. His faith faltered and he fell. So I am reminded also of a passage in the scripture in the New Testament that says that we walk by faith and not by sight. So if we look at what's going on around us, our faith will falter. We will sink in the waters if we look at the storm that's going on around us. So stay focused. Keep your prayer life up. Seek help if you need it. But stay focused on the Lord. Stay focused on God. God's promises have never failed us. So stay focused on that. And just remember that Chaplain Barna and myself and the Religious Support Office here at Bicentennial Chapel is praying for you, the community. We're praying for our leaders. And if there's anything you need, be sure to try to reach out to us any way you can. We care for you, and we are praying for you. Thanks.